You're in a meeting that feels like it's dragging on. Decisions are being made, and you notice something unsettling. The person with the most authority in the room, the one everyone seems to listen to, is about to make a decision that you know is wrong. It's not complicated, it's obvious. It's going to hurt the project, impact the people involved negatively, and potentially harm the company too. You expect someone to address this. Surely, someone will speak up. You wait for it, but no one does. Then you realize that you aren't going to speak up either. It's not that you are particularly afraid. It's that you've processed the situation in your mind. You've figured out what speaking out would cost you. You understand the implications of challenging authority, and the price feels too high. So you stay silent, and the wrong decision goes ahead. Everyone in the room knows it's wrong, and yet no one voices their concerns. Afterward, you think about the person who made that decision. You wonder, are they a bad person? Are they corrupt? Do they intend to cause harm? You come to a surprising conclusion, probably not. Likely, they are just someone with power who has become accustomed to not being questioned. They have gradually learned, often without realizing it, that their judgment does not need scrutiny. They view pushback as disloyalty and disagreement as a threat. Over time, this mindset changes them in subtle ways. It doesn't twist them into a dramatic villain. Instead, it shifts their sense of normalcy. What once felt wrong gradually feels right, or at least necessary, or just the way things have to be. I often reflect on power, not because I wield much of it, but because I've seen how it operates. I've observed its effects on individuals. These aren't evil people. They are just ordinary folks given a little authority, and then more authority until the rules begin to bend around them instead of them bending to the rules. Here's the paradox. Power doesn't just attract bad people, though sometimes it does. More commonly, power creates an environment where moral clarity becomes optional. The standard checks that usually keep people grounded begin to fade away. The gap between action and consequence becomes so large that cause and effect start to lose their connection. Two prominent thinkers captured aspects of this phenomenon. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that humans are driven by an insatiable will, like a blind force that pursues its desires without regard for what is right or wrong. Generally, society restrains this will through other people, rules, and consequences. However, power weakens those constraints, allowing unchecked desires to flourish. What results isn't necessarily evil, but rather unrestrained and out of balance, as a version of human yearning that is free from the friction that typically shapes it into something acceptable. On the other hand, Michel Foucault approached the concept of power from a different angle. He proposed that power is not something one simply possesses. It flows through structures, systems, and unwritten societal rules about who gets to speak and who must listen. Those in leadership positions aren't inherently villains. They are merely functioning within contexts where their perspective becomes the only one that matters. Their comfort becomes the priority, and their interpretation of reality becomes the standard. Both perspectives reveal a disconcerting truth. Power does not necessarily attract malevolence. Rather, it generates it by eroding the conditions that tether individuals to the experiences of others. Power creates distance between decisions and their consequences, turning empathy into a luxury instead of a necessity. You can see this dynamic play out in various situations. The CEO who enacts layoffs without understanding the uproar that follows, viewing it simply as a logical business choice. The manager enforcing a policy that brings distress because adherence to rules feels like their duty, and questioning them seems like weakness. The public figure making a damaging statement, only to be perplexed by the backlash, because in their circle of agreement and support, their words seem normal, rational, or even kind. These individuals are not monsters. That's the unsettling aspect. They are people who have spent enough time in power that their views have become the default. Their comfort and frame of reference have shifted, and they no longer produce the necessary checks against their decisions. There's a well-known joke about a fish swimming along when another fish swims by and asks, "How's the water?" The first fish, confused, responds, "What's water?" This illustrates the nature of power. When you are immersed in it long enough, it becomes your environment, your norm, and you begin to stop questioning its presence, because the thought of differing conditions doesn't even register as a possibility. Schopenhauer suggests that this reflects the will's operation without restriction. Human nature, when left unchecked, tends to prioritize self-interest. This isn't always malicious. It's simply how our desires tilt toward our needs first. With power, that inclination intensifies. There's less resistance to contend with, less friction, and fewer reality checks. Foucault contributes that power doesn't merely strip away restraints. It also produces new realities. It shapes what is apparent and what is ignored. It defines what is recognized as a problem and what is merely background noise. Individuals at the helm of power structures prioritize their own concerns, rendering the experiences of others secondary or invisible. When I observe scandals or situations where powerful individuals face backlash after being called out for wrongdoing, I find myself wondering, how did they think they could escape accountability? The answer typically reveals a deeper truth. They were not thinking about evasion. They were not making ethical assessments. They existed in an environment where their behaviors lacked immediate consequences. Their judgments went unchecked, and the common feedback mechanisms that typically signal when someone has crossed a boundary had silently disengaged. It is not that they are evil. It is that they navigate a reality where the established rules of moral reasoning do not function as they should. They inhabit a world where the distance between cause and effect stretches so far that it ceases to feel real. The individuals affected by their decisions grow abstract and distant, rendering it more challenging to cultivate empathy. This discomforting truth extends to us all. Many of us can recognize moments where we feel the pull of power, even in small doses. When we gain a little authority at work, a bit of financial security, or some social standing, something shifts. It's subtle but significant. Our time begins to feel more valuable, our opinions more important, and our needs more urgent. Others become slightly more abstract, viewed more as obstacles to manage than as people with their own needs and concerns. We do not intend for this shift to occur, but it does, almost without us noticing. Power, whether substantial or slight, alters our environment. It shapes what captures our attention and what fades from view. It changes who we answer to and who must answer to us. These accumulative shifts gradually reshape our perspectives. Foucault spoke about power as being productive. It doesn't just constrict, it creates. It births new ways of seeing, fresh lines of thought, and justifications for behavior. In positions of authority, power fosters a reality where an individual's actions start to seem rational. Their decisions appear reasonable, and the harm caused is viewed simply as unfortunate, inherent to the process, or someone else's problem. The disconcerting part is that you begin to believe it. You genuinely convince yourself of your perspective. Confronting the alternative, like seeing yourself as someone who harms others, misuses privilege, or becomes the very thing you used to criticize, is too uncomfortable to bear. So the mind adapts, rationalizes, and transforms the wrong into something more complicated, more nuanced, and full of context. I see echoes of this behavior in smaller interactions every day. A person who uses a handicapped parking space because they're only going in for a second and believes it won't hurt anyone. A manager scheduling meetings at 6 p.m., convinced that their time is more critical, assuming that everyone else should simply adjust. A financially stable individual complaining about taxes, unaware that their grievances sound starkly different to someone worrying about paying rent. These aren't malevolent people. They are individuals who have slipped into complacency. They have ceased to measure their actions against the experiences of others. They've allowed power, even a minor amount, to create a bubble where their needs overshadow those of everyone else. When you amplify this dynamic, handing someone significant power, institutional power that influences thousands with a single decision, the bubble expands, it thickens, and is harder to perceive from the inside. Those encased in it do not become evil. They become dangerously detached from the repercussions of their actions. Schopenhauer viewed suffering as humanity's natural state, driven by will. This will cause us pain through constant desire and striving, perpetually unsatisfied. He argued that relief lies in compassion. It's the ability to acknowledge others' suffering as real, significant, and worthy of concern. However, power complicates that compassion. It does not eradicate it entirely, but makes it more challenging, as power interposes distance. That distance transforms someone else's pain into a theoretical problem, rather than an immediate concern. This might explain why power draws moral ambiguity or darkness. Sometimes that darkness isn't a callous evil, it's simply the absence of necessary connections. It's the absence of accountability. It's the absence of the friction that compels us to contemplate anyone other than ourselves. And that absence is a product of power, that is, systemically generated, inevitably occurring, and without malicious intent. In that meeting, when the wrong decision is being put forth, you keep your mouth closed. Everyone else, similarly reticent, stays silent. The individual in power genuinely fails to recognize the issue at hand because they are acting in a scenario where the problem remains hidden. Their judgment is the standard, and questioning them feels incongruous. You start to grasp, maybe not in articulate terms, but as a visceral realization, how this cycle works. This is how well-intentioned individuals commit errors that negatively affect others. Not out of malice, but due to distance, disconnection, and a slow, quiet process by which power erodes the checks that keep people honest. In the future, perhaps you will find the courage to speak up. Or maybe you won't. You might someday find yourself in a position of authority and discover what that power does to your perspective. You'll notice the gradual shifts, the things that become easier to overlook, and the responsibilities that start to feel less pressing. Perhaps this is just the way things are. Perhaps power and moral ambiguity are always destined to intersect. Not because wicked individuals pursue power, but because power fosters conditions under which typical moral reasoning breaks down. It turns empathy into an option rather than a necessity, allowing others' hardships to become abstract rather than immediate. Acknowledging this reality doesn't offer a solution. It doesn't protect you from experiencing its effects. It merely brings awareness. It illuminates the pattern. It helps clarify that the antagonist in most stories is seldom a true villain. They are ordinary people with authority who have slipped from scrutiny, those who have been insulated from questioning, those who no longer feel the need to care. Maybe this is the uncomfortable truth. Power and the shadows of moral darkness frequently find each other, not because evil individuals seek it, but because power orchestrates the circumstances in which moral checks weaken and empathy is deprioritized. The ache for recognition is powerful, and without the tether to others' experiences, it can lead to an unsettling reality. And as you process this, you realize that self-awareness is essential. Understanding this pattern can help illuminate your path, but it does not shield you from being caught in its grip. It's the journey of recognizing that the villain often manifests as an individual, just a person ensnared by power, who lost the thread that connects them to the consequences of their actions. And that honesty is both uncomfortable and true.